I think we have to come back for a proper masterclass later because we are ready for our next talk. On stage, we have Lorraine Copes from Be Inclusive Hospitality, and I am not the best at running microphones, but I do try. Here we go, and we are ready for our next talk. So, everyone, please put your headphones on, but not take them afterwards, okay? And for everyone at home, please welcome Lorraine Copes from Be Inclusive Hospitality. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. And welcome all. Thank you so much for joining me today. Let me just figure out how this clicker works because nothing's happening. It's not working. Yay. Oh, thank you. Let me start again. Thank you all for joining me today. It's an absolute delight to be here, actually. The weather is beautiful here, which I'm very happy for, because in England it is pretty cold, even though it's sunny. Anyway, so my name is Lorraine Copes, and before we jump straight in, I'm just going to give you some context to tell you a bit about who I am and why I'm here. And so I'll start by saying that I am British Jamaican. And what that means is that I am born in the UK, but my parents are Jamaican, which means that in my household, everything from food, culture, music was Jamaican. And when I stepped outside, obviously I was in England. I'm a multi-award winner, so I've been really fortunate over the past few years to be recognised for the work that I do, and that has been quite far and wide, so anything from GQ awards to being recognised as a social entrepreneur within the sector. I'm a food, drink and hospitality judge, so I work across the board, whether that is the Great Taste Awards, Uber Eats, Verve Clicquot Bold Women Awards. I feel really passionately about recognising talent within the industry, and for that reason do as much judging as I possibly can. I'm a lover of food, drink, travel and music, and I'm based in London. But for those of you that do recognise regional English tones, I'm actually from a place called Birmingham, which is the middle of the country and the best city in the UK, though I don't live there. And just to give you some context around my background, so I don't work specifically within bars, however, I do work within the hospitality industry broadly. So I'm firstly a social entrepreneur. I founded a not-for-profit organisation by the name of Be Inclusive Hospitality back in 2020, and we have a mission to accelerate race equity within the hospitality industry. I'm a consultant, and so my previous life, I describe it as, but for the past 2 decades, I have led procurement and supply chain teams for a number of leading brands, including the Gordon Ramsay Group, Shake Shack, Elior Contract Caterer, the list goes on and on. And so with a previous life in hospitality and procurement specifically, I now consult within that area for brands and businesses. I'm a coach. The common thread that you'll see throughout everything that I do and have done within my career is people and supporting people to move forwards and upwards. And my specialism I would describe actually as working with women at all career levels who want to improve confidence and courage to achieve their career goals. It's something I'm super passionate about and do an awful lot of it. And last but not least, I'm a speaker, and so all of the 3 things that I've described to you here today that I describe as a specialism, I do an awful lot of talking across the UK and across the world on topics that are near and dear to my heart. And so the theme for today's presentation is to be authentic, be intentional, and be inclusive. And when I was kindly asked by the team at the Campari Academy, Monica, to do this event today, I had a really long think about what would be relevant for each and every one of you here in this room, irrespective of what job that you do. And I think that what really resonated to me was some of the key learnings that I've had throughout my career and continue to have. And when I think about authenticity and being intentional, it has informed where I am here and now. So through sharing my story, I'm hoping that you can hopefully take away some nuggets that can inform your lives and your careers equally. What I do recognize, and I always say this often, especially with my coaching clients, in this thing called life, we often are faced with tough decisions on which way to go. That could be from a career perspective, that could be from a personal perspective. But it's what is motivating those decisions is what I want to talk to you about here today and how I've arrived in my place. We're going to start with authenticity. And by authenticity, I simply mean to turn up as yourself. And the reason why authenticity is something that's really important to me is because throughout my career, I've been in many, many environments where I've often been the only woman, the only black woman, the only Brummie, person from Birmingham in the room. And when you are constantly a minority in spaces, it can force you to question who you are and whether you fit. And that's why authenticity is a topic, is a really important one to me. And I'm pretty sure for anyone in this room that has ever been in this space where they might feel othered, it might be also important to you. So I'm personally a lover of quotes, absolutely adore quotes. And I love this one in particular, which is from my favorite rapper, Jay-Z. And it's from a song called A Dream. And the quote says, "Remind yourself, nobody's built like you, you design yourself." And when I read it, I want to rap it, but I can't really rap, so I'm not going to bother that. But what I will say, though, what I love about this quote is it firstly talks to the fact that there's only one you, right? There's only one you. What it also speaks to, though, is the power of being able to control your narrative and control your life. And I think I should print this out and put it on a poster because I love this quote. I think it's phenomenal. But anyway. When we think about authenticity, though, in our journey, I firmly believe that the past informs the future. And so what I'm really going to take you through now is what has led me to a place within my career and my life where I lead with authenticity. And with that said, we are going to go slightly back in time. And we're going to go back in time to the 1960s in particular. So I mentioned at the beginning that I'm British Jamaican. My parents, my grandparents, and their grandparents were resided in Jamaica, shall we say. And the reason why I want to talk about Jamaica is because back in the 1960s, after the Second World War, a lot of Caribbean islands and former British colonies, or British colonies at the time, were invited to the UK to help rebuild Britain after the Second World War, right? And so my grandparents were part of that community of individuals that were invited. So in terms of them being in Jamaica, as a consequence of colonization and slavery. And so back in the 60s, my parents and their parents decided to migrate to the UK. And what was commonplace within the Caribbean was the sacrifice of traveling to a different country, setting up home, so finding a home, finding a job, and then about 8 to 9 years later, sending for your children. That happened to both my parents. And when I reflect and when they tell me these stories, and for those of you that might be in the room, just imagine the sacrifice of going abroad and saying to your child, "See you in 5 years," as you set up home. You know, it's a pretty difficult position for anyone to be in. Nonetheless, when I listened to the stories, what I took away from those stories was sacrifice, adversity, and fortitude. To have a vision and to pursue that irrespective of the circumstances that might present themselves to you at that moment in time. And so, as with many migrant communities, my parents ended up in a place called Burton-on-Trent, which is north of Birmingham, really small town. And that's eventually where they went on to meet. And my mum told me once a story of when when her mother sent for her to come to England, she expected the pavements to be paved with gold, because she's in a small island of Jamaica, and she expected England to be very rich, actually. And as I mentioned, off the back of Second World War, the country was actually in need of being rebuilt, and so her reality was very different. Her reality was also one of hostility. You know, in the 60s, there weren't very many black or people of colour in the UK. And so she arrived in this place, which was strange and foreign to her. And both her, my dad, and their parents created a life in this city, in the town, sorry. And again, I'm very much a reflector. So upon hearing stories from my parents about their journey to the UK, the words that come to mind are courage, resilience, and optimism. And real resilience to leave your home country and to stay and persevere in an environment that has not always been the easiest to do. So my dad was a singer, quite a successful singer at the time. So I was on TV a lot, on the radio, had a record deal, has an album. And he decided to move to Birmingham to pursue his career. And my mum then, 19, followed him. My mum later then fell pregnant, and my dad was forced to get a proper job. And by that I mean, unless you are the Beatles or make it really big, earning money in the music industry can be really inconsistent. And so with a child on the way, he needed consistency. So he abandoned his career in music and got a proper job. This is my family in the 80s, so a very long time ago. But what followed my elder brother was myself and my younger brother. And I grew up in Birmingham, you know, had a relatively normal childhood as far as we grew up in a really multicultural area. And Birmingham is a place, if any of you haven't been, or if you've been to London, in contrast, Birmingham is very friendly, warm. It's a really nice place to be, actually, and that was the experience of my childhood for the most part. But listening to my parents and their stories, again, the words that come to mind are sacrifice, passion, and love. So fast forward beyond my childhood then to the age of 18, and I went to university. And I went to university and studied a degree in logistics. Now, for those of you who are aware of what logistics is, primarily it's around the supply chain, it's moving goods from A to B. And it was probably the worst 3 years of my life. I was bored to tears, I really was. And in reflection, why I studied logistics, to give you context, is when I describe the historical context of my parents and my grandparents, them traveling to the UK for a better life, when I made a decision about education, it wasn't one of passion or love, it was one of stability and what to me at the time made common sense. And so when I reflect on my period then, that decision was informed by fear, safety, and I was just uninterested in what I was studying. And by fear and safety, for me, going down the route of business and logistics was a safety net of occupation and future career prospects in a nutshell. So the 20 years that followed, I had a relatively successful career within the hospitality sector, as I mentioned. My background is procurement and supply chain. And for me, the highlights of my career, whilst I was on boards for businesses, was the love for food and drink, being able to do it for free, and people. And what I've always loved about hospitality, phenomenal people, and being in a position where I could develop and support them on their journey. And that I did for a very long time. But also for a very long time, I felt as though something was missing. And what I mean by that is, if you think back to the beginning of the presentation, and I talked about authenticity, and I talked about the fact that in many environments that I've been throughout my entire career, I'm usually a minority in some way, shape, or form. And whether it was a circumstance or whether it was in my head, I felt as though I had to leave parts of who I am outside of work. And so for a very long time, I, for instance, had an Instagram which was procurement, an Instagram which was foodie and me. I had an Instagram that was coaching, and I really kept my life in silos. And again, this was by design of me believing that my authentic self could not occupy a single space. And then in 2018, after a long stint working for the Gordon Ramsay Group, I decided to quit my job and take some time out of work. And it was the first time in 18 years of working that I didn't work, and I traveled and I used space. And I don't know if anyone can relate to this, but often when we are working day to day, we have busy lives, we are not afforded the time and the stillness to really think about what it is that we want to do and really carve out what it is that we want to do for the future. And so I had that space, and during that time I actually completed a life coaching diploma, and that was transformational for me. It changed my life. And the reason for this is, in order to help other people to move forward, you've got to better understand yourself. And it was during that diploma that I better understood my values, I got really clear on what my purpose was, and I really, in that moment of, it was about a 10-month period, really recognized what was important to me as an individual and what I wanted to see in the future for my career and my personal life. And so I was faced with making a decision. Would I go back to procurement, or would I take an alternative route? And I actually decided to go back to procurement. And again, fear, safety. I had 18 years experience within the field. I was operating at a really senior level, and I opted for safety. However, as many of you remember, in 2020, COVID hit. And we were at home for a very long time. And once again, that afforded me the time and space to reflect. For the first couple of months during the pandemic, I spent all of my time talking to people that are previous colleagues, current colleagues, friends, family, that I liked and respected. And I was able to 100% turn up as myself each and every day. And it was in the early parts of the pandemic, actually, I decided that I never wanted to go back to the way I felt before, which was turning up with a part of myself present. And so during the pandemic, I decided to take voluntary redundancy. And in hindsight, it was an ill-informed decision, because if you think back to June, none of us knew at that point how long it would go on for, but I took the leap. I love this picture, by the way, because it really does speak to the idea that we all do wear different hats, different faces, dependent on the environment. But what it really represents for me is the idea of always being able to bring every single face into my business, my work, and who I am and who I'm perceived as an individual and as a professional within the hospitality sector. And what I lent into in order to make that decision was courage, confidence, and clarity. The clarity was achieved through studying my life coaching diploma. The confidence really was built over time. Having, worked for 2 decades, I felt very confident that I had the acumen, the know-how, and the knowledge to launch my own business and veer into a different path that would be in the sector that I know well, but looking at different issues and tackling problems that are closer to my heart than, say, procurement. And so we're going to move forward now into being intentional. Another quote, which I absolutely love, is, "Intentional living is the art of making our own choices before others' choices make us." And this, again, it really resonates for me, because irrespective of what job you hold or where you are in life, it's recognizing the idea that if you are really clear on what it is that you want, whether that's your career or personal life, it's within your ability to carve that out. So a question that I asked myself an awful lot, especially when I was studying my life coaching diploma, is, who am I? Who am I, and who do I want to be? And when I ask you that question, I just want you to think about what comes to mind. And whatever it is that comes to mind, is that who you want to be? you'll note I use jigsaws an awful lot. I see everything as a puzzle. And I think that for many people that I know actually that work within hospitality, their personal life does intersect and intertwine with their professional life. I think it's just by nature of what the hospitality sector is, because it's super social. People are really friendly generally, and this slide really represents my ability to do this without being operational within hospitality, which I'll talk about what I do shortly in a bit more detail. But what I also want you to think about on an individual level is what your mission and vision is. Often when we talk about visions and missions, we think about businesses. But I personally have a mission. And what is yours, I wonder? And my mission is absolutely to serve others who have been marginalised, and actually to build community. And that's what I'm on the journey of doing. But really importantly, I am keen to ensure that throughout my life, I have alignment in everything I do and in every way that I do it. And so just kind of recapping on what I've covered off to date, authenticity has always showed up throughout my career as a really important reflection that I've often had because of the environments that I've found myself in. Studying life coaching led me to becoming more intentional about how I lead my life and also ultimately how I lead my career. And in exploring being authentic and being intentional, it led me to be inclusive. And Be Inclusive Hospitality is the business that I founded back in 2020. It's a thriving community to accelerate race equity within the hospitality, food and drink sectors. And just to clarify what equity means, because I'm often asked the question, equity supports the idea and recognition that we're not all operating or starting from the same place. And equity supports the idea that some of us need more help than others based on historical context or other instances and issues that might disable others. So it's really about creating a level playing field for everyone that's partaking, whether that's in work and whether that's in life. And that's why we say equity instead of equality. We're a not-for-profit organisation, and we're also a social enterprise. And the business was born out of lack of representation of people of colour in positions of influence and the supply chain. And this business was initially founded off the back of my lived experience. But since incorporating 3 years ago, we've gone on to produce 4 industry reports, which also support my ideas and my perceptions of what the industry needs to do to become a better industry ultimately. And what I'm most proud about in starting my business is that we've really fostered community. And by community, I mean brands, I mean businesses. We have ambassadors from all backgrounds and career levels. We have mentors. And we have a community, a sizable community, who are all collectively working together to advance change across the sector. And I really do believe it's that community that has really propelled significant growth over the past 3 years, which we've been able to experience. And in some of our work, some of the things we do, I mentioned that we produce reports, so we produce something called the Inside Hospitality Report. I encourage you to read the report and download it. Whilst we have a very specific focus on race, we survey all hospitality professionals from all backgrounds. And just touching on some of the points that Jack had made earlier, just around training and education, there's some real nuggets and gems within the report that can apply to anyone within the industry. And something that really stands out actually is a stat that 82% of all respondents of our recent survey, so 3,000 respondents, all are optimistic and positive about the possibilities of a career within the sector. And so we know the optimism is there. It's what we do next to evolve and to ensure that it's fair and it's equitable, and importantly, it's inclusive. We hold a number of events, we partner with brands, we deliver scholarships, we deliver mentorships. But at the core of everything that we do is community, as mentioned. And so, bringing things full circle, when you think about all the key words I listed, and that I really took on board and in a way embodied, stories passed on from my grandparents, from my parents, that I've experienced myself, they all apply to me here today. I had to take courage and confidence to launch this business in the first place, but I'm doing it out of passion and love for the industry and the people within it. There's absolutely adversity, and I say adversity because the reality of the fact is not everyone believes there's a problem to address, and not everyone is supportive of the cause. However, I think having been on this journey, it's really shown me the best of the industry. You know, people that I don't know from Adam reaching out to me, extending an olive branch on how they can help in a very small way or a very big way. It's been a really joyous journey. And optimism really sits at the root of it all. Optimism because, as I said, I've really experienced the best of our industry. My network has grown tenfold since starting the business, and we continue to grow at pace simply because of community. Simply because of community, underpinned by our hard work. I won't discount that. It's been a hard and long journey, but it's been a fantastic one. It really has. And I wanted to share a bit about what we do in video form, but I can't see a play, so I think we'll skip past that. Can we play? Can we? No? Okay. Yeah, no? Let's see. No? Oh, God, okay. Thank you. Oh. I don't think it will. I think we might skip past that. It was a little 2-minute video, but if you check us out on Instagram or LinkedIn, you'll find loads of content on there anyway. I just wanted to kind of summarize by just reminding you of what it means to be inclusive and what inclusion is. And it really is the practice of providing equitable access, opportunities, and resources to people who might otherwise be excluded. And so the question I ask for all of you here today is, who's sat at your table? And I ask you this question because all too often the topic of D&I is discussed at length, and there's an expectation or assumption that it can only apply on a universal level or a business level. And the reason why I ask you who's sat at your table is because we all individually have the responsibility. And when you think about who's sat at your table, is it reflective of what you want to see in the world? And if it's not, just remember that it all starts with just a single step. And I think whether you're talking about sustainability, you're talking about EDI, it can seem like a daunting task, but it starts with a single step. And I ask that you keep that in mind as you walk away from this talk here today. What I'll finally add is that it's not a definitive destination. When you think about authenticity, when you think about being intentional, when you think about being inclusive, it's not an ultimate destination, it's a journey. And for all of you that are here today, I just ask you to reflect on what you want your journey to look like and what you want it to be. I am my brand, and I say I'll almost finish. There's one more slide after this, but I'll finish by just saying that when I talked about intention and I talked about authenticity, I suppose a key word missing from that is consistency. And my learning over the past 3 years has been this, that I am my brand, and I am able to carve out the brand that I see fit for myself. In the very same way, each of you can do the same, quite simply. Thank you all for listening. Oh.
Sorry, because for you to be able to hear, I need to give you this.
Thank you.
Okay, so we are back on. So I have a question.
Fire away.
Because we were having a discussion earlier, and this stems from a larger discussion in narrative. Because a lot of the time you'll see people of color having a narrative that is not necessarily true or just. It becomes like chefs that are people of color. They always become successful because they were lucky, or they were, they started as an immigrant and then they were just very fortunate to get to where they are. Then it's never because of their own accomplishments, as opposed to their maybe non-colored counterparts. Do you see this a lot, and how can this be changed?
I do. Oh, do I use this still? Oh, because he must. Anyway, hold on. I see it an awful lot, and I always try and lead with empathy, because in this thing called life, I think everyone is trying to be the best they can, make a successful living, and when you are a minority in any situation, it can affect how you show up. And I'm sure some of the women in the room, in the virtual room, can also understand this. I think with time this is changing. I think that the generation beneath me are unapologetically themselves and are shattering ceilings in a way that people of my generation and those before me didn't have the confidence or feel that they could. So I agree with that statement, but I think things are definitely changing. And I think that not only the generation beneath me who are of colour have a very different perspective on how they are able to show up, and they show up as themselves, but also there are more allies that are actively championing people being themselves. So, yeah.
And, if you apply this to a wider application, like, for example, for bartenders, for young bartenders, how do they, for example, protect themselves from listening to all of the brands, the PR, the media telling them, you need to be this, you need to do that, this is going to be good for your career? How can they say, stop, actually, this is not authentic to me, I am me, I want to continue to be me? Because it's very difficult.
It's extremely difficult, and it really starts, though, with knowing yourself. I think whether the bar industry or as humans broadly, there's some inner work that we should all do to know who we are and what we stand for. Because when you get crystal clear on that, there's nothing that can sway you left or right if you are crystal clear on what it is that you want and how you want to get there. And I think the other thing as well to add to that is you can create your own lane, right? Yes, there are, I'm sure, really successful bartenders that exist that have pursued a particular path and achieved a certain level of success. But creating your path is very possible, and it's really visible and apparent in many sectors. And so leaning into that idea, but also just really knowing yourself, I think is really important, because that will stop the sways. And, even applying it to myself, we've been approached by some huge global organizations that we've said no to because what they have wanted to do or partner with doesn't align with our values, and certainly don't align with mine. And I'd rather grow slowly, working with businesses who genuinely care about the work, than grow quickly with those that don't.
And when you talk about equity, this is becoming also a big topic within our industry, because now for a few years we've focused so much on diversity, but not everybody, but there's a lack of including inclusivity, because one thing is to get everybody to the table, but another thing is to make sure that the table is suitable for everyone and they want to stay. So, how can we make an industry that allows people to be different?
I think it largely comes through education, and as opposed to refer to a function of our business, diversity and inclusion, we refer to it as education and resources. Because one thing I've really learned over the past 3 years, but beyond, is that when you think about the 10 people that you spend the most time with, more often than not, we do this in workshops actually, but more often than not, they mirror you. You know, usually married if you are married, usually similar colour, depending on where you live in the world. They reflect you. And if they don't reflect you, or if they do reflect you, how are you actively seeking out the opinions of others, and how are you seeking out knowledge to understand difference? Because until you do that, you'll only look at things through a bird's eye, a tunnel vision, and your ideas will be informed by external factors which aren't always accurate and aren't always true, i.e. the news, for instance, you know? And so there needs to be a just common understanding of who you're working with, understand their cultures, you know, understand who's at the table. And then when you really understand them, then you can start to take the necessary steps to accommodate.
And do you think that, for example, this new popularity of social media has led to us losing a little bit the kind of ability to debate, discuss, have a conversation, and not take it so personal, but allowing for disagreements in order to find the solution?
Yeah. I think that social media can be hugely divisive. I think that there are certain areas of work that shouldn't really have a home on social media. But I also do think that social media holds people accountable and holds businesses accountable. And in many ways, that is very necessary. And I say this as a person that, thinking back to 2020, obviously the pandemic, George Floyd, and seeing a number of businesses utilize social media as a vehicle of support. Meanwhile, that support wasn't actually happening. And some of those businesses are held to account on that basis, and they absolutely should be. That said, I personally don't debate anything with anyone on social media. I post pictures and I'm off.
And as someone who has chosen to kind of have a very public narrative, it sometimes can get very draining. But when you meet those obstacles and when you have your convictions challenged and pushed back, is it always worth pushing forward, or is there any moments ever where you feel like, oh, I want to give up and have an easy life?
Yeah, absolutely. You know what I'd say though, and I've said this a few times before, even though this business was founded off the back of a problem, 95% of my time is spent in a place of joy. And that is because we deliver initiatives to support people to move forwards, and we work with businesses that might not all the way get it, but are on the journey to getting it. And the quality of conversations you can have with people who are open to discuss is a really wonderful thing. That 5% is a headbanger. However, it's in the minority. And so most of my time is really spent in a place of really, optimism, being proactive, being collaborative, laughter, watching people develop and flourish. Like, it's mostly in a place of joy.
Do we have any questions from the audience? In real life or online? No? Okay. Yes, we have a question from Dean. Let me run. I don't know how Sav used to do this, honestly.
So my question is, how do you deal with someone who just flat refuses to change? You got an older gentleman, for example, part of an older generation that just isn't going to change. Do you ignore them and focus on the next generation, or how?
Yeah. And yeah, absolutely, to that point. And I think there are many businesses and individuals who are not interested in changing, and they are not my focus at all, to be honest. I invest, and the reason for this is it's obviously personal to me as a black woman, right? So I invest my time and energy on those that want to move forward. And what we've seen over the past 3 years is, like a magnet, we attract businesses and people that are alike. And what consequently happens with that is businesses, their peers see them and they're like, oh, we should be involved. And then they get on board. They get on board on the learning journey, and that's the beginning. And so I expect that with time we'll continuously, consistently grow. And there will be some people and some individuals that just won't get it, and it's not my job to convince them otherwise, to be honest. We don't sell the work we do. We speak really loudly about it. We talk from a fact base. We produce data. We have events. But I never go to an event and sell, and it's not in my nature. But I'm also not interested in selling or trying to persuade anyone that it's the right thing to do to include people that look differently to you, quite simply.
Thank you so much, Lorraine.
No problem.
And also, a big round of applause, because it actually is the 3-year anniversary of Being Inclusive.
Yeah, it is. Thank you.